All right, so our video for tonight is titled, Why Should You Study History? And it's a good question to ask, right? I mean, in some ways you're studying it because that's just part of school. History is a class you take. But, it's important to think about why, because not everybody likes history. A lot of students just get this. It's super boring. It's a lot of things that happened a long time ago, and I just don't care about it. And that's okay. If you're a person who thinks that it's boring, you're not particularly interested in it, I may or may not be able to change your opinion. And it's okay to not be a huge fan of history or history class. But it's important to understand that there are good reasons for studying it, even if it's not your favorite subject. On one level, there's just so much out there. Every time you see a monument or you look at an old picture of an event that took place, like the Wright brothers flying the airplane for the first time, or the one of the man standing in front of the tanks at Tiananmen Square, a more modern event, there's a story there that is deep and complex and impacts who we are today. And so it's actually really not as boring as I think a lot of students make it out to be. Certainly, having to memorize long lists of names and dates, yeah, that's boring. But where you really start getting to the cool stuff is when you get to the stories. So the TCI textbook covers a number of reasons, 4 of them, for why to study history. And this is not, the only 4, but they're 4 good ones. The first is to help develop empathy for others. The second is that studying history makes us better thinkers. The third teaches us to avoid the errors of the past. And the fourth is that it's interesting. And I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. So the first reason is that by studying history, it helps you to develop empathy for others, not sympathy. Sympathy is, feeling sorry for someone. But empathy is a little bit different. What empathy is being able to imagine yourself in another person's place and to try to understand how they would have felt, what their desires would have been, their ideas, why they did what they did. Put another way, it's kind of like being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Studying history helps us to do that. We can start to learn about people who lived long before us. Try to make sense of their happiness, their sorrow, the things that happened to them or the things that they did. And by doing that, it's going to help us today to be just a better, more well-rounded person. It'll help us in our interactions with each other today. I like this cartoon because it's kind of ironic, right? But it gets to that idea of empathy. How would you like it if the mouse did that to you? And it's funny because, of course, the cat doesn't feel empathy. But that's the idea of empathy, being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And that's a skill that takes practice. And it matters. It's important for everyone, whether you like history or not. The second reason is that studying history helps to make us better thinkers. Right? So the famous sculpture called The Thinker by Rodin. As we study history, it's not about memorizing a lot of names and dates. History comes from a Greek word that actually means investigation, right? So in some ways, history is more like investigating the past. And so you have to take different sources. You have to take contrasting or sometimes opposite accounts of what happened. And you have to think about them. You have to break down the evidence and try to make sense of what happened. And again, those are skills that aren't just history skills. Those are critical thinking skills that are going to help you later in life. They're going to help you to understand what's going on today and make better decisions as a grown-up when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to have a job. You know, you need to use those skills that you practice in history class. So it helps to make us better thinkers. This is one you've probably heard before, that by studying history, it helps us to avoid the errors of the past. The famous phrase that goes along with this is that those who fail to remember the past are doomed to repeat it. Right? Those who fail to remember the past are doomed to repeat it. And in some ways we see that. We see history repeating itself. You know, a prominent example would be Napoleon failing to invade Russia in 1812. He took his army into Russia. They hit a cold winter, and they were defeated and sent packing back to France. Adolf Hitler did the same thing in World War II. Tried to invade Russia. The army hit a cold winter. They were defeated and forced to retreat back to Germany. Right? So, you know, a historian would say you've got to look at what's been done before and learn from those mistakes so we can avoid repeating them. And the fourth reason is that history is interesting. And this may be the one that, you know, if you're not a history person, you may go, no, it's not. Okay? And that's fine if you think that. You know, I may not be able to change your opinion, but I would not be surprised in the least if you have seen one or more of the different movies and TV shows that are based on historical stories. You know, just a few for example. You know, here's a whole bunch of movies and TV shows that some of them are fictional, right, or historical fiction, but they are based on actual events that happened in history. So as I said, I mean, when you really get past the sort of the boring what happened and when and names and dates, you get to incredibly rich and interesting stories of what happened in the past that helps us to learn about who we are today and how we got here. Our book talks about this being more like piecing together a puzzle than, you know, just learning a whole bunch of facts. Yes, you know, the facts matter. You need to have correct facts, but learning what happened and figuring out why it happened is a puzzle. It's a mystery, and there's not necessarily just one right way to look at it. So the deeper you dig, the more you're going to get out of it, the more interesting it becomes. So, you know, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. If you just stay at the surface level and that's it, it's probably not going to be very interesting. But if you move past that, if you dig deeper, you're bound to find some really, really interesting stories and ideas that will capture your interest and will hopefully make you think a little bit differently about why we study history. So what I'd like for you to do with your homework assignment is to think about those 4 reasons. And you can pause this video and go back to earlier slides. But think about those 4 reasons: that it helps us to develop empathy for others, it makes us better thinkers, it teaches us to avoid the mistakes of the past, or that it's interesting. Really think about which one you feel is the most important reason that we should study history. And I want you to email me from your TNCS email account which one you think is the most important reason and why you think that. Okay? It doesn't need to be, you know, a huge long answer. A couple of sentences, you know, maybe 3 or 4 sentences. Which one is the most important reason and why do you feel that way? If your TNCS email account is still not set up and you haven't had a chance to fix that problem, then you can either email me from a personal email address, or you can go onto Portals, and in Portals, if you go to the class page, there is a link somewhere on the page that says send message or send teacher a message, you could actually send me an email that way and answer the question. Either way is fine, but please try to do so from your TNCS email account.